She was only an ordinary innkeeper in a quiet coastal town, or so everyone believed. But when a group of soldiers arrived and whispered the name of a man she thought was dead, her past came crashing back. She wasn't Emma the innkeeper anymore. She was Raven, the ghost they all feared. The small town of Grayhaven was the kind of place where nothing seemed to change. It sat by the edge of the cliffs, where the sea pounded against the rocks with endless patience. Tourists passed through in the summer, snapping pictures of the lighthouse, buying cheap souvenirs, then vanishing back to the cities they came from the rest of the year. Grayhaven slept quietly. At the heart of this sleepy town stood a narrow inn with crooked shutters and faded paint. Its sign read Sea Breeze. In to outsiders, it looked like nothing special. A cheap bed, a modest breakfast, a friendly smile at the front desk. But to the locals it was a landmark, and to Emma Lowell it was her hiding place. Emma moved with steady grace as she carried trays of tea and bread to the guests. Her dark hair was always tied back, her clothes neat but plain. She was polite to everyone but never too close. She listened when travelers shared their stories but never offered her own. People liked her because she was calm, dependable, and discreet. To them, she was just Emma, the innkeeper. Nothing more. But Emma knew better. The inn wasn't just her livelihood, it was her mask. Every day she lived the same routine, and every night she locked the doors, checked the windows, and sat awake long after midnight, listening for sounds no one else would notice. She lived like someone expecting a ghost to knock at any moment. One rainy evening, the inn was quiet. A storm raged outside, waves slamming against the cliffs. Emma sat at the desk with a worn ledger open in front of her, pretending to balance numbers. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was far away. Memories came uninvited. A dark warehouse in Warsaw, the smell of oil and iron, a man whispering her old name in the dark. Raven. She pushed the thought away quickly, her jaw tightening. Raven no longer existed. That woman had died years ago. The front door creaked open. Emma looked up, heart skipping. Instinct made her scan the newcomer's posture, clothes, eyes. A group of men stepped in, shaking rain from their jackets. They didn't look like tourists. Too sharp, too disciplined. Their boots were polished, their shoulders square. Soldiers, she thought instantly. They booked 3 rooms without much talk. One of them, taller than the rest, with a scar above his eyebrow, looked at her longer than necessary. His gaze lingered, steady and unsettling. Emma forced a polite smile, handed him the keys, and turned back to her ledger. But her pulse beat faster. When the men climbed the stairs, the taller one glanced back once, as though testing her mask. She kept her face calm until the sound of their boots faded. Only then did she exhale. The next morning, Grayhaven woke as if nothing had changed. Fishermen hauled nets at the dock. The bakers sold fresh loaves and children played near the lighthouse. But Emma knew something had shifted. Outsiders had arrived, and with them, danger. At breakfast, she overheard pieces of their conversation, words like shipment, coastline, and target. Their voices were low, but to Emma they were as clear as alarms. She had lived in a world where those words meant only one thing: operations later. When the inn was quiet, she sat alone at the desk, staring at the faded wallpaper. She thought of the scar along her ribs, the one no one ever saw. She thought of the mission gone wrong, the betrayal that ended her old life. She had buried Raven that night, buried her with false papers, silence, and distance. But the past was moving again, and Emma knew shadows never stayed buried. The storm didn't ease for days. Grayhaven was wrapped in a blanket of gray clouds and restless waves. Fishermen cursed at the weather, and tourists disappeared altogether. Only the locals kept moving, their boots dragging through wet cobblestones, their conversations short and weary. At the Sea Breeze, and Emma tried to keep her routine steady. Breakfast at 7, rooms cleaned by 10. Firewood stacked in the evening. To any guest, she was the picture of calm hospitality. But inside, her thoughts spun like the waves outside. The strangers had not left. The 3 men stayed in their rooms during the day, coming down only at odd hours. They didn't ask about local sights. They didn't mingle. They moved like a team, quiet and precise. Emma noticed the way they spoke with their eyes more than their mouths, the way one always checked the windows before they sat. They reminded her too much of the world she had buried. One evening she carried a tray of tea up the stairs. As she reached the landing, she heard voices behind one of the closed doors. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the words froze her. Intel confirms the shipment arrives on Thursday night. Through this port, yes, small boats first, then trucks inland, and the target. A pause. He'll be there. We're certain. Emma's hand trembled. She gripped the tray tighter, her heart thudding. A name burned in her mind before they even said it: Rafael Mendez. She hadn't heard it aloud in years, but it never left her. The man whose betrayal to have destroyed her mission. The man who had slaughtered her team. The man who believed she was dead. She forced her legs to move, delivering the tray with a steady hand. The men nodded politely, thanked her, and shut the door. Emma walked back downstairs, every step heavy. That night she sat by the fire in the empty inn, staring at the flames. She told herself she shouldn't care. She wasn't Raven anymore. She was Emma. Mendez belonged to another life. But the thought of him so close made her chest tighten. Sleep didn't come. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying old memories she hated. The jungle heat, the gunfire, the screaming, the moment she ran through the trees with blood on her hands, realizing no one else from her unit had survived. She had sworn never to return to that life. Yet fate had dragged her to her doorstep. The next morning, one of the men came to the desk, the tall one with the scar. His voice was calm, his eyes sharp. "You've been here long?" he asked. Emma looked up from her ledger, masking the flicker of fear. "Years." Why? He studied her for a moment too long. Just curious. He walked away without another word, but Emma's heart didn't steady for hours. Later that day, she closed the inn early. She told the last guest it was because of the storm, but the truth was she couldn't breathe under the weight of suspicion. She went upstairs, opened the old trunk beneath her bed, and pulled out the box she hadn't touched in years. Inside lay a pistol wrapped in cloth, 2 passports with false names, and a photograph of her old unit. Faces she tried to forget stared back at her. She touched the corner of the photo, her throat tight. She almost put everything back but instead, she loaded the pistol and slipped it into the drawer of her nightstand. That night, she sat in the dark, listening to the sea and the wind, waiting for the past to break through her fragile walls. It didn't take long. At midnight, a car rolled into Grayhaven, its headlights slicing through the rain. Emma rose from her bed and peered out the window. The car stopped near the dock. A man stepped out, even from a distance. Even after so many years, she knew him. Rafael Mendez. Alive, walking on her soil. Emma pressed her hand against the cold glass, her breath fogging the pain. The world tilted, and the mask she had built for years cracked. She whispered into the silence of her room. Emma hardly slept that night. Every creak of the inn, every gust of wind outside made her rise and check the window. She knew she should have ignored what she saw, pretended the car hadn't come, pretended Mendez wasn't real. But denial had no power against memory. She had seen him, and once the past was recognized, it never went away. By morning, her eyes were shadowed, but her movements remained steady. She brewed coffee for the guests, changed sheets, lit fires in the hearth. To anyone watching, she was still the calm innkeeper, but inside, her heart beat in broken rhythms. The 3 she was sure came down for breakfast. Their conversation was clipped, their eyes alert. Emma avoided looking at them, but when the tall one with the scar glanced her way, she knew. He had noticed the change in her. Later, when the dining room emptied, he lingered. He placed his empty cup on the counter and leaned forward slightly. "You seemed uneasy last night," he said softly. Emma forced a polite smile. Storms unsettle everyone. His lips curved faintly, but his eyes didn't soften. "Not like that. You saw something, didn't you?" Emma froze. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. She lowered her gaze quickly, gathering plates. "You're imagining things." The man didn't argue. He simply gave her one last look, a look that said he didn't believe her, and walked away. That evening, Emma went to the docks. The storm had cleared, leaving behind damp air heavy with salt. Fishermen repaired nets, and gulls shrieked overhead. Emma walked quietly, her hood pulled low. She needed to see for herself, needed proof she wasn't losing her mind. At the far end of the dock, near the warehouses, she saw him. Rafael Mendez stood surrounded by men. His hair was streaked with gray now, but the sharpness in his face remained. He spoke to one of his guards, gesturing toward the sea. Emma's body stiffened. The sight of him alive here was like reopening an old wound that had never healed. She turned to leave, but a voice stopped her. "Careful where you walk, Innkeeper." It was one of the soldiers from the inn, the youngest. He stepped out from the shadows of a stack of crates,